You're just a maid. This dog cage is where you belong. The billionaire's next move shocked everyone. Wait, before you scroll away. I need you to know that what you're about to hear really did happen to a woman who spent 9 years cleaning floors she wasn't allowed to sit on, cooking meals she wasn't allowed to eat at the table, and smiling through insults from a woman who thought love was something you could buy in a jewelry box. Nobody in that mansion knew her real story. Not even the man who owned it. And on the night everything came crashing down, it wasn't the woman in the yellow dress who ended up on her knees. Stay with me till the end, because the truth in this one is going to sit with you long after the video's over. Hey, welcome back if you're new here. I'm so glad you found your way to this channel. Before we start, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from today? I love seeing where all of you tune in from. Tonight's story is one about dignity, cruelty, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't ask for applause. It's emotional, it's real, and I promise you, it does not end the way you think it will. Let's get into it. She used to whisper "just get through today" to herself in the mirror every single morning. Elena Reyes was 34 years old, and for the last 9 years, the Callaway estate in the Hamptons had been the center of her whole life. She arrived every morning at 5:30, before the sun had even decided to show up, and let herself in through the service entrance with a key that had worn smooth in her palm from years of use. She polished silver that cost more than her rent. She ironed shirts for a man who had never once asked her last name in 9 years. She scrubbed floors so clean you could see your own reflection in the marble, floors she was never invited to walk across in anything but soft-soled shoes, quietly, like a ghost who wasn't supposed to be noticed. Elena didn't mind the work. Work had never scared her. What she minded, some days, was being invisible in a house full of people. She sent almost every paycheck home to her mother in Bakersfield, who was raising Elena's 12-year-old son, Matteo, while Elena worked 3,000 miles away. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself. But it was steady, and steady was worth more to Elena than almost anything else in the world, because steady meant Matteo could stay in his school, steady meant her mother's medication got paid for, steady meant nobody she loved went without. Nathaniel Callaway, the man who owned the estate, was 34 as well, a name that showed up in business magazines more than it showed up in his own kitchen. He'd built a logistics company from nothing after his father's construction business collapsed when Nathaniel was in his 20s, and by the time he turned 30 he was already being called one of the most disciplined young CEOs on the East Coast. He wasn't cruel. He was just gone to meetings, gone to airports, gone to a version of success that left very little room to notice the woman who kept his entire household running while he chased the next deal. Which was exactly how Vanessa Sterling liked it. Vanessa was 33, breathtaking in the way magazine covers are breathtaking, engaged to Nathaniel for 8 months and already redecorating rooms she didn't yet legally own. She had grown up wealthy, married and divorced once wealthy, the kind of wealthy where staff were furniture and furniture didn't have feelings. From the very first week she moved into the guest wing, something about Elena unsettled her. Maybe it was the way the older staff spoke about Elena with real warmth. Maybe it was the way Nathaniel, distracted as he was, always seemed to relax a little when Elena brought him his coffee, the one thing in his day nobody had to remind her how he liked. Vanessa noticed things like that. And Vanessa did not forgive things like that. It started small. A private comment about Elena's accent. A complaint to the house manager that Elena lingered too long in rooms. A demand that Elena address her as Miss Sterling and never simply M, because M apparently made Vanessa feel old. Elena absorbed each one the way she absorbed everything. Quietly, professionally, because she had a son in California and a mother with high blood pressure and she could not afford to be the maid who caused a scene. But something was building in that house. Something none of them could see yet. And it was going to come apart on a Saturday night in front of 80 of the wealthiest people on Long Island. Nobody in that ballroom knew they were about to witness something they'd talk about for years. The engagement party had been Vanessa's idea from the very beginning, thrown 3 weeks before the actual wedding, an excuse to show the entire Hamptons social circle exactly what her life was about to become. String quartet in the East Garden. A raw bar flown in from Maine that morning. Peonies imported out of season because Vanessa had decided white roses were, in her words, for people with no imagination. Elena had been on her feet since 4 that morning, coordinating with caterers, steaming tablecloths, making absolutely certain that nothing, not one single thing, could be blamed on her. For most of the evening, it worked. Elena moved through the edges of the party the way good staff are trained to, present but unseen, refilling glasses, guiding lost guests toward the restrooms, catching a toddler's spilled juice before it hit an antique rug. An elderly guest, a widow named Mrs. Ashford who had known the Calloway family for decades, stopped Elena near the terrace and took both her hands. "You're the reason this house still feels warm," Mrs. Ashford said quietly. "Don't think we don't notice." It was such a small moment. It shouldn't have mattered to anyone else. But Vanessa was standing 8 feet away with a champagne flute in her hand, and she saw the whole thing. Something in her face changed. She'd spent the entire party performing warmth for a room full of people whose approval she needed, and here was the maid, being handed genuine affection like it cost nothing. Vanessa had grown up being told that attention was a finite resource, that someone else's warmth was warmth stolen from her. She set her glass down harder than she needed to. "Elena," she called out, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry a word. Elena followed her into the hallway off the ballroom, the noise of the party fading behind the heavy oak door. Vanessa's smile was gone entirely now. "I don't know what performance that was with Mrs. Ashford," Vanessa said, "but I'd like you to remember your role in this house. Your staff. Not a guest. Not a friend. Not family. Staff." "I understand, Miss Sterling," Elena said, keeping her eyes down, keeping her voice even, doing what 9 years of practice had taught her to do. "Do you?" Vanessa's voice had an edge to it now that Elena had never heard before. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you enjoy being adored by people who aren't paying your salary." Elena said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. Vanessa studied her for a long moment, something cold and decided settling into her expression, and then she turned on her heel and walked back into the party like nothing had happened at all. But something had changed. Elena could feel it in her chest the rest of the night, a small, sick certainty that whatever this was, it wasn't over. She had no idea how right she was. What happened next made 80 guests go completely silent. It was nearly 11 when Vanessa reappeared at the center of the ballroom, and this time she wasn't smiling for the cameras. She was smiling the way people smile right before they do something they've been planning for hours. "Everyone," she called out, tapping her glass with a fork until the string quartet stopped and the room turned toward her. "I want to share something fun with you all tonight." Nathaniel, deep in conversation near the fireplace with 2 of his board members, turned with the rest of the guests, an easy smile still on his face, no idea what was coming. 2 of the household staff wheeled in a large dog cage from the service hallway, the kind used for transporting large breeds, wire-sided, with a thin blanket and a stainless steel bowl inside it. A ripple of confused laughter moved through the crowd, the kind of laughter people do when they're not sure yet if something is a joke. "Elena," Vanessa called out, scanning the room until she found her near the bar cart. "Come here, please." Elena's stomach dropped. Every instinct in her body told her to refuse, to walk away, to protect whatever was left of her dignity. But 9 years of survival instinct pulled her forward instead, because refusing in front of Vanessa's guests, in front of Nathaniel's business partners, felt like it might cost her the job that kept Matteo in school 3,000 miles away. "I've been thinking," Vanessa announced to the room, "about loyalty. About the difference between people who belong somewhere and people who just occupy space. And I thought tonight, we could have a little fun with that idea." She gestured at the cage. "Elena spends more time in this house than anyone. Practically lives here. Practically belongs to it." A few uncomfortable laughs. "So I thought, why not make it official?" The room did not laugh this time. "Get in," Vanessa said to Elena, her voice suddenly sharp, all pretense of a joke gone. "You're a maid. This is exactly where you belong." Elena stood frozen, tears already burning at the corners of her eyes, humiliation crawling up her spine in front of everyone she'd served coffee to for years. And because she had learned, over 9 long years, that resisting Vanessa Sterling in public only made things worse for her later, Elena lowered herself to her knees on the marble floor and crawled into the cage. The door clicked shut. Vanessa turned the small padlock with a soft, final click that seemed to echo through the entire silent ballroom. "There," Vanessa said, straightening up, smoothing her yellow gown, looking down at Elena through the wire with something between delight and disgust. "Doesn't that look right?" Elena knelt in the cage, gripping the bars, tears streaming down her face, unable to look up at the 80 stunned faces surrounding her. And that was the exact moment the ballroom doors opened, and Nathaniel Calloway, who had stepped out 20 minutes earlier to take a phone call, walked back in and saw the woman who had run his household for 9 years locked in a cage on his own marble floor, while his fiancée stood over her laughing. Nobody in that room had ever seen Nathaniel Calloway's face go that still. For 3 full seconds, he didn't move. The room seemed to hold its breath along with him. And then something happened that none of the guests could have predicted, something that had nothing to do with the party, nothing to do with etiquette or scandal or embarrassment. Nathaniel's eyes locked on Elena's face, tear-streaked, humiliated, kneeling in a cage on his own ballroom floor, and something old and buried came rushing back to him all at once, 10 years falling away in an instant. He was 24 again. Broke. Sleeping in his car outside a 24-hour diner off Route 46 in New Jersey, 3 months after his father's construction company had collapsed and taken the family's entire savings with it. He remembered the exact booth. He remembered a waitress named Elena who used to slide him a free slice of pie at the end of her shift and tell him every single night for 2 months, "You're going to be somebody, you know that? I can just tell." He remembered her giving him $20 out of her own tip jar the week he couldn't make his car payment, refusing to let him pay her back, saying only, "Someday you'll do this for somebody else. That's the deal." He had lost track of her when he finally got back on his feet. Changed towns, changed his life, and in the blur of building a company from nothing, he had never once gone back to that diner to say thank you. He had told himself, for years, that he would find her someday. He was looking at her right now. 9 years older, her hair different, her name on his household payroll under E. Reyes, a name he had walked past 100 times without ever truly seeing. Elena. His voice cracked on her name. Elena looked up at him through the wire of the cage, and something in her face, recognition, disbelief, 9 years of silence breaking all at once, told him everything he needed to know. "You know each other." Vanessa's voice, suddenly uncertain, cut through the frozen room. Nathaniel didn't answer her. He crossed the ballroom floor in 6 long strides, dropped to his knees in his $3,000 suit in front of 80 of the wealthiest people in the Hamptons, and worked the small padlock with his bare hands until the house manager rushed forward with the spare key. The moment the door swung open, Nathaniel didn't help Elena up like an employer helping staff. He helped her up like a man helping the person who had once kept him from disappearing. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking, loud enough for the entire silent room to hear. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to recognize you." Vanessa stood a few feet away, her champagne flute still in her hand, watching her entire engagement collapse in real time, and she had absolutely no idea yet how much further it was about to fall. Vanessa's face went through 5 different expressions in the space of 10 seconds, and none of them were the right one. "Nathaniel," she said, laughing, but the laugh had a crack running through the middle of it now. "It was a joke. A party game. Don't make this into something it isn't." "A joke." Nathaniel's voice was quiet in a way that was somehow louder than shouting. He still had his arm around Elena's shoulders, steadying her, and he did not let go while he spoke. "You locked a human being in a dog cage in my home. In front of my guests. In front of my business partners. That is not a joke, Vanessa. That's cruelty. And you did it because you were jealous of a woman for being kind to people." Around the room, guests were shifting, whispering, some already quietly reaching for their coats. Mrs. Ashford, The elderly widow who had complimented Elena earlier that night, stood at the edge of the crowd with her hand pressed to her mouth, tears in her own eyes. "She's staff," Vanessa said, her voice rising now, desperation replacing her usual composure. "I don't understand why everyone is acting like I committed a crime. People discipline their staff. This is how these things work." "This is not how anything works," Nathaniel said. "Not in my house. Not ever again." He turned to Elena, who was still trembling, mascara streaked down her face, her uniform, the same uniform she had worn to serve this exact party, now stained from the floor of the cage. "Elena," he said gently, "I want you to sit down. I want you to have anything you need. And I want you to know that whatever happens after tonight, you are never, ever going to be treated like that again in this house." He turned back to the room, to the 80 guests who had watched the entire thing unfold, and something hardened in his expression, the same discipline that had built his company from a diner booth into a billion-dollar business now aimed squarely at the woman he'd been planning to marry. "I think this party is over," he said. "And Vanessa, I think you and I need to have a conversation that shouldn't happen in front of an audience. Everyone, please, take your coats. I'm sorry for how tonight ended." The guests filed out in stunned, murmuring clusters, glancing back over their shoulders at the abandoned cage still sitting in the middle of the marble floor, at the caterers quietly beginning to clear a party that had ended in humiliation instead of champagne toasts. Vanessa stood alone in the emptying ballroom, watching her entire future dissolve, and for the first time in her life, no amount of charm or tears was going to fix what she had done in front of witnesses. By midnight, the ring was sitting on the hallway table, and Vanessa was gone. The conversation between Nathaniel and Vanessa lasted less than 15 minutes. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene for the staff to overhear, just Nathaniel's voice, low and final, explaining that he could forgive a lot of things in a person, but he could never build a marriage with someone who thought cruelty was funny when the person on the receiving end couldn't fight back. Vanessa tried every angle she had: tears, anger, accusations that he was overreacting, a threat that she'd make sure everyone in this town knew what kind of man he really was. None of it moved him. By the time her car pulled out of the circular driveway, the engagement was over, and so, in the eyes of everyone who had witnessed that night, was Vanessa Sterling's place in Hampton society. Elena, meanwhile, sat wrapped in a blanket in the estate's kitchen. The same kitchen she had cooked in for 9 years but had never once sat down in as a guest, while the house manager brought her tea she didn't order and didn't have to make herself. Nathaniel found her there an hour later, his tie gone, his sleeves rolled up, looking less like a billionaire and more like the exhausted 24-year-old she remembered from that diner booth. "I owe you an apology that's going to take longer than tonight to give properly," he said, sitting across from her at the small staff table. "But I need you to know something first. That $20 you gave me, I still have the receipt from the night I paid my car note with it. I kept it in my wallet for 3 years, telling myself I'd find you and pay it back 1,000 times over. I lost the receipt somewhere along the way. I never lost what it meant." Elena wiped her eyes, a small, disbelieving laugh escaping through the tears. "You remember that?" "I remember every single thing about those 2 months," Nathaniel said. "You were the only person who believed I'd amount to anything when I genuinely didn't believe it myself. And then I built this whole life, and somewhere in the middle of building it, I stopped noticing the people who made it possible to build it all. I am so sorry it took a cage on my own floor for me to actually see you." Elena didn't say anything for a long moment. 9 years of swallowed dignity sat heavy in her chest, and it wasn't the kind of thing that healed in one conversation. "I need you to know I'm not asking for pity," she finally said quietly. "I did that job because it fed my son, not because I needed saving." "I know," Nathaniel said. "That's exactly why what happened tonight was so wrong. You were never someone who needed saving. You were someone who deserved respect. And you didn't get it. Not from her, and honestly, not enough of it from me either. Word travels fast in a town where everyone's kitchen has a window facing their neighbors. By Monday morning, The story of the engagement party had spread through the Hamptons like wildfire. Quietly at first, in hushed phone calls between the wives who'd attended, and then loudly, when one guest's teenage daughter posted a blurry video from her phone that had somehow captured the moment the cage door clicked shut. It went further than anyone expected. A local news outlet picked it up by Tuesday. By Wednesday, it had crossed into national conversation about how domestic workers were treated behind the closed doors of wealthy households, with commentators and labor advocates weighing in on camera about dignity, class, and the invisible people who keep enormous homes running. Vanessa's name became something people said with a wince. 2 country clubs quietly rescinded her membership. A boutique she'd been in talks to open with a business partner suddenly fell through. The consequences weren't legal, nothing about what she'd done technically broke the law, but they were social, and in the world Vanessa had built her entire identity around, social consequences were its own kind of exile. Elena, meanwhile, found herself receiving something she had never once experienced in 9 years of quiet, careful service: being seen. Other household staff across the Hamptons began reaching out to her, some through mutual friends, some through the same local paper that had covered the story, sharing their own quiet stories of being talked over, dismissed, treated like furniture instead of people. Elena, who had spent 9 years believing her job was to be invisible, suddenly found herself becoming something like a voice for people who rarely got one. She didn't ask for that role. It found her anyway. Nathaniel, for his part, didn't try to fix things with grand gestures or a check written to make the story disappear, the way Elena half expected a man of his wealth might. Instead, he did something quieter. He sat down with his household staff, all of them, from the groundskeepers to the kitchen team, and asked, for what several of them admitted was the first time in years of employment, how they were actually being treated. He raised wages across the household. He set up a proper grievance process, something that had never existed before. And he asked Elena, directly, what she needed. Not what he assumed she needed, but what she actually needed. "I need my son to know his mother didn't spend 9 years being small," Elena told him. "That's what I need." Some debts can't be repaid with money, but Nathaniel tried to honor this one the right way anyway. 2 weeks after that night, Elena flew home to Bakersfield for the first time in 8 months, and this time, she wasn't flying economy on her own dime, scraping together vacation days she'd been saving for years. Nathaniel had arranged the flight, first class, and had insisted, gently, without making it feel like charity, that Elena take real time off, paid, to be with her son and her mother. Matteo met her at the airport with a hand-drawn sign that said is famous, clearly influenced by whatever version of the story had made it into his middle school's group chats, and Elena laughed for what felt like the first time in months, holding her son so tight he complained he couldn't breathe. Her mother, watching from a folding chair near baggage claim, oxygen tank at her side, had tears in her eyes long before Elena reached her. "I saw the video," her mother said quietly, in Spanish, holding her daughter's face in both hands. "Mija, I am so sorry that happened to you. And I am so proud of how you carried yourself through it." That was the thing Elena kept coming back to, in the quiet moments after the story had died down in the news cycle and life had started to feel normal-shaped again. She hadn't done anything remarkable that night, hadn't fought back, hadn't delivered some sharp, satisfying comeback the way people probably wished she had when they watched the video online. She had simply endured something cruel with as much dignity as she could hold on to, and it had been enough. It had always, in 9 quiet years of hard work, been enough. Nathaniel called while she was still in Bakersfield, checking in the way he'd started doing regularly now, not as her employer but as something closer to a friend who owed her a debt he intended to spend the rest of his life honoring in small, steady ways. "I've been thinking," he said. "What if you didn't come back as a maid?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means I want to fund Matteo's education, all the way through, no strings attached. And it means I have a foundation that's been sitting mostly dormant for years, meant to support domestic workers and their families. Fair wages, healthcare, legal protections. I need someone to actually run it. Someone who knows exactly what it feels like from the inside. I can't think of anyone better. Elena sat with the phone against her ear, looking out at her mother's small backyard, at her son doing cartwheels on the grass, and felt something inside her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope, arriving quietly, the way it usually does. A year later, the Hamptons remembered that night for very different reasons than anyone expected. Elena never went back to cleaning that house. Instead, within 6 months, the Callaway Foundation for Domestic Workers had grown from a dusty, unused name on paper into a real organization with real reach. Fair wage advocacy, legal aid for household staff facing exploitation, healthcare stipends, and scholarship funds for the children of domestic workers across 3 states. Elena ran it with the same quiet discipline she'd once brought to polishing silver. Except now that discipline was building something instead of maintaining someone else's comfort. Matteo started 8th grade with a college fund already growing in his name, something Elena still had trouble believing when she looked at the numbers. Her mother's medical bills were no longer something Elena calculated in her head every single month with dread. For the first time in years, Elena slept without the low hum of financial fear sitting underneath every dream. Vanessa, meanwhile, resurfaced occasionally in gossip columns tied to increasingly smaller social circles, the story of the cage following her the way certain stories do, permanently, the way cruelty often follows people long after the person they hurt has moved on and healed. She never publicly apologized. Some people, Elena had come to understand, never really do. Elena stopped waiting for it somewhere around month 4, and found that letting go of the need for an apology was its own kind of freedom. Nathaniel and Elena's relationship settled into something neither of them had quite expected. Not employer and employee, not quite anything with an easy label, but a genuine friendship built on an old diner booth debt that had finally, fully, been repaid, and then some. He showed up at foundation fundraisers not as the face of the story but quietly in the back row, letting Elena be the one people listened to. At one such event, nearly a year to the day after that night in the ballroom, a young woman approached Elena after she'd finished speaking. A housekeeper from Queens, nervous, holding a folded piece of paper with notes she never ended up using. "I just wanted to say," the woman said, "that when I saw what happened to you, and then saw what you did with it afterward, it made me believe I mattered too. In my job. In my life. Thank you." Elena held the young woman's hands the way Mrs. Ashford had once held hers in a hallway that felt like a lifetime ago, and she understood, fully, for the first time, that the worst night of her life had somehow become the thing that let her help other people survive theirs. Every so often, Elena still thinks about the version of that night that almost happened, the one where nobody walked back into that ballroom, where the cage door never got unlocked, where she simply endured the humiliation alone and went home in silence the way she had 100 other small humiliations before it. That's the story most people like her live. Quietly. Without cameras. Without a billionaire's memory suddenly cracking open at exactly the right moment. Elena knows that. It's part of why she does the work now, why the foundation matters to her more than any amount of money or apology ever could. Because dignity shouldn't depend on luck. It shouldn't depend on whether the right person happens to walk through the right door at the right second. Every person who serves coffee, who cleans floors, who raises other people's children while their own children grow up 3,000 miles away, every one of them deserves to be seen, whether or not anyone ever catches it on video. Nathaniel learned something that night too, something he says now in every speech he gives about the foundation. He learned that success has a way of making people forget who fed them when they had nothing. That the people who are easiest to overlook are often the ones holding everything together. And that recognizing someone's humanity should never require a moment of crisis to finally see it. Elena still keeps one thing from that night, tucked into a drawer at home where Matteo sometimes finds it and asks about it. It's not the cage, and it's not anything from that ballroom at all. It's a copy of an old diner receipt, the $20 one, that Nathaniel had a framer restore and gave to her on the 1-year anniversary of that night, with a note that simply said, "Some debts take longer to repay than others. Thank you for never giving up on me before I'd given anyone a reason to believe in me at all." If there's one thing this story asks you to carry with you, it's this: the way we treat people who can't fight back for themselves says everything about who we really are. Kindness costs nothing, and cruelty, no matter how quietly it's dressed up as a joke, always eventually comes out into the light. If this story moved you even a little, I'd be so grateful if you hit that like button, subscribed for more stories like this one, and shared it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity is never something we're allowed to take from another person. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.